All right. And do you want to try and just share your presentation, see if it'll let you as well?
Let me
If not, I can
just
share.
see if that will work. There we go. Can people see that?
Yeah, brilliant.
Fabulous.
Yeah, so I'll pass you over to Drew. So thank you, Drew, for joining us. I'll hand straight over to you if that's all right, and obviously you can introduce yourself, and then so you've got 45 minutes. I don't know if you want to how long you want to talk for, and if we've got a chance for any questions at the end, if you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do use the chat. Shout out questions as we're going along. I'm really happy for this to be as interactive as you want it to be. Let me start by introducing myself. My name's Drew Yeager. I'm one of the co-founders of Club Soda. My background is as a writer and researcher. I spent about 15 years working in healthcare policy in all sorts of different kinds of roles. Along the way, I've trained as a coach and a mindfulness practitioner and as an NLP practitioner and all sorts of different things, which are all helpful in my role in Club Soda. I'm also the author of a book called How to Be a Mindful Drinker, which was published by Dorling Kindersley back in 2019. Let me tell you a little bit about Club Soda. Essentially in Club Soda, we do three different things. The first is we are all about curating the best choices in alcohol-free drinks. One of the kind of most useful insights from the world of behavior change is a really simple one, which is that if we are looking to change our behavior, finding a substitute really helps us. And the UK, you may or may not know, is actually one of the world leaders in the availability and range of alcohol-free drinks. And there's a growing market for them. And actually what we found in our work in Club Soda and others have found is that simply swapping out an alcoholic drink for an alcohol-free drink can be one of the quickest and easiest ways of reducing or limiting your alcohol consumption. It sounds really obvious, but it's amazing how many of us don't consider it. The second thing that we do in Club Soda is we're all about creating connections. We've got a big community. We've got about 17,000 members of our group on Facebook, many more tens of thousands of people worldwide on our email list. We are quite unusual in this space in that we actively support people to cut down or moderate their alcohol consumption as much as we do support people to stop completely. And in our community, we're probably about 50-50 split between those two different groups. And then the final area, and this is the area which I lead on in Club Soda, is that we're all about empowering people to change their drinking. So we run courses. We've got two big courses, one called How to Stop Drinking, one called How to Drink Mindfully. They do what they say on the tin, each with 31 online lessons that people can work through at their own pace with tools to track their drinking habits and changes in their health and well-being and building people's confidence and commitment to change over time. And I also run workshops and talks and all sorts of things like that as well. So that's a little bit about us. I want to start, if it's all right, with a bit of a pub quiz. So do feel free either to shout out answers or to pop them in the chat. But I just want to kind of get a baseline of where we are on the subject of alcohol-free drinks, especially. Which of these labels indicates that a drink is alcohol-free? ABV, for those of you who don't know, is alcohol by volume. So that's the amount of pure ethanol that you would find in a drink. So is it 0.0% ABV, 0.05% ABV, 0.5% ABV, or 1.2% ABV? Which of those on a label would indicate that a drink is alcohol-free? We've got some answers coming through. Brilliant. Excellent. Good. We've already got all right answers. So essentially, UK labelling regulations are horrendously outdated and confusing, and we've been working with the Department of Health to try and reform them and update them. But broadly speaking, we in Club Soda tend to follow the international guidance, which is that anything at 0.5% or below is effectively alcohol-free. German researchers have poured vast quantities of alcohol-free beer down research participants' necks and tested their blood alcohol level. And what they demonstrated is that, broadly speaking, anything at 0.5 below is effectively alcohol-free. It's not going to adversely affect your blood alcohol levels. It leaves you safe to drive. But there are good reasons why you might choose 0.0 or 0.5%. So anyone who's not drinking for religious reasons, who might want to avoid any trace of alcohol, might choose an option which is 0.0. You'll see 0.05% as well. Incidentally, Heineken Zero is actually 0.05%, but they don't know how to do rounding, so it goes the wrong way. But broadly speaking, anything 0.5% or below is alcohol-free. The reason I include 1.2% is for a couple of reasons. The first is there is some variety in what's considered alcohol-free around the world. 1.2 is classed as alcohol-free if you happen to be in France. One of my co-founders in Club Soda is Finnish. 2.8% in Finland can get classed as alcohol-free. But actually, the other reason, you know, aside from kind of making broad stereotypical jokes about different countries and drinking habits, is actually 1.2% is a really critical number in the UK, because outside of the categories of beer, wines and spirits, food and drink can contain up to 1.2% alcohol and not need to be labelled as containing alcohol. So ripe banana smoothies, kombuchas and other fermented products can actually contain up to 1.2% alcohol and not need to be labelled as alcohol-free because they're not a beer, wine or spirit and in those categories. So labelling is confusing, but in your supermarket, broadly speaking, if you're going to look, if you spot anything which is 0.5% ABV or below, it's going to be alcohol-free. So, second question, who's most likely to want an alcohol-free drink? And again, if you want to pop answers in chat. Someone who's pregnant, a designated driver, a regular drinker, or someone with a drink problem. Any thoughts on that? Who's most likely to want an alcohol-free drink? If you want to put some thoughts in the chat. Driver, maybe? Any other takers? Yep. Okay. Interestingly, there is a right answer to this question. Somebody said me, exclamation mark. So let's talk about these. So in terms of designated drivers, we actually did some research with Heineken last year looking at drivers' behaviour, particularly going to country pubs, and whether people will choose venues based on their alcohol-free drinks offer. And actually what we found overwhelmingly is that drivers would default to a Diet Coke or an orange juice before they'd even consider an alcohol-free beer. So there's definitely work that pubs can do, and we can definitely do in terms of improving education around what's available. People who are pregnant obviously will be wanting to choose alcohol-free options, so that's a very good thing. Interestingly, actually, though, the right answer to this is it's regular drinkers. There was a really interesting study done by Nielsen, who researched consumer behaviour, couple of years ago that looked at people's purchasing behavior in supermarkets and found overwhelmingly that the largest quantities of alcohol-free drinks were bought by people buying regular strength alcohol. So if you are somebody who drinks alcohol, you are the target market for alcohol-free beers, wines and spirits. You may not realize that, but that's how drinks companies look at you, and certainly that's borne out in the statistics about who is buying and drinking alcohol-free drinks. A final question for you. What's a good reason for choosing an alcohol-free drink? Having a night off, wanting a low sugar option, pacing yourself, or you don't need a good reason. Actually, you don't need to bother putting anything in the chat for this, because I'm leading you to a conclusion, which is that you don't need a good reason to choose an alcohol-free drink. Although, actually, the other three things are good reasons. If you are thinking about limiting your alcohol consumption, all of these other reasons for choosing alcohol-free drinks are valid. You know, if you look across the population as a whole, about 25 million people in the UK today won't drink alcohol for all sorts of reasons. You know, they might be long-term alcohol free, they might be taking a break, or they might just be having a night off. But in any situation, you know, you, even as a regular drinker, may want a night off drinking, and choosing an alcohol-free drink can be a good reason to do that. In terms of sugar, basically alcohol-free beer is the healthiest thing that you can drink in a pub aside from water. Somebody's asked a question: does 25 milliliters of an alcohol-free drink have a mean value sugar level of less or more than the mean value for an alcohol drink? Okay, so sugar and alcohol-free. We've actually got a blog on the Club Soda website on the relationship between sugar and alcohol and sugar levels in alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks. Broadly speaking, you can have the same or similar levels of sugar in alcoholic and non-alcoholic alternatives. It isn't true that alcohol-free drinks will necessarily have more sugar. That certainly won't be true for alcohol-free beers, though it may be for wines, but it's going to vary product by product. It is a little complicated. Reading labels and educating yourself is important, is the bottom line. Pacing yourself is another good reason why you might want to choose an alcohol-free drink. So not to upset any public health people listening in, but I think that the advice that we give people on alternating drinks doesn't work, in large part because of the way in which people interpret that advice. So when people think about alternating drinks, people very often start with an alcoholic drink and then switch to a non-alcoholic drink. And broadly speaking, that does two things in our heads. One is that because alcohol is very good at making us not care, we've actually increased the likelihood that our second drink will have alcohol in it. But also it sets up an expectation in our heads that an alcoholic drink is the real drink and something else is a substitute which isn't as good. So the advice that I tend to give people, if you're thinking about pacing yourself, is have 2 alcohol-free drinks first. That gives you time if you arrive at a venue. Say if you would normally start drinking at 5 o'clock, you probably won't start drinking until 6:30. So you bought yourself some time. If you're pacing yourself and alternating doesn't work, you've started drinking alcohol later. But also you're resetting your brain's expectations about what an alcohol-free drink is. And I want to talk a little bit about that, about choosing better alcohol-free drinks. And the first point that I want to make is just to encourage you to challenge your assumptions. You know, if you have been brought up in an era where your best alcohol-free options in a pub were Diet Coke or Beck's Blue, the world has moved on. There is an enormous range of delicious grown-up alcohol-free drinks available, which give you more choices. The other thing which is really important as well is to think about the occasion. You know, when we drink, we drink in context, you know, in particular situations, surrounded by people, in our homes, on our own, but also there's lots that goes into our experience of drinking, which actually isn't what's in the glass. One of the conversations I have pretty often with people, for example, about cutting down on gin and tonic is, have you ever considered just drinking tonic? You know, if you take a beautiful glass, ice, a lovely tonic, garnish, actually you replicate a lot of the experience of having a G&T, but without the gin. So it's useful to think about the occasion. In terms of the availability of drinks, as I've mentioned before, you know, you will find a lot in your local supermarket. My local Tesco's, for example, has got a wide range of alcohol-free beers, some alcohol-free ciders, selection of alcohol-free wines, 3 different alcohol-free gins. You know, there is lots available. If you're a beer drinker particularly, you will find lots and lots and lots of alcohol-free beers available. One of my colleagues in Club Soda works in a brewery, is also a beer writer. She describes, you know, at one end of the scale, you've got unchallenging lagers. If you like, you know, a mainstream brand like Heineken or Budweiser or Peroni, you will find good alcohol-free versions of those in the shops and increasingly behind bars as well. And those beer companies work really hard to make good quality alcohol-free alternatives, but you'll also find a ton of alcohol-free craft beers, some of which are de-alcoholized, others specialist brewers now making alcohol-free beers using lazy yeast and other techniques which have a naturally low ABV. But you'll find everything from, like IPAs and ales through to porters and all sorts of interesting craft beers. One of the things which is also worth looking out for is alcohol-free spirits. They don't tend to stand up particularly well to drinking on their own. I'll just be very honest about that. But actually, they can be a really good option if you're looking to reduce the strength of a cocktail, reduce the overall ABV of a cocktail. Swapping out an alcoholic for a non-alcoholic ingredient can be a really useful way of doing that. There's a brilliant company called Lyre's who are based in Australia. Basically, they can replicate your entire cocktail cabinet alcohol-free. They've even got an alcohol-free absinthe, if you're interested in that. If you're interested in making a Sazerac or something similar, alcohol-free, there are really good options for making cocktails. When it comes to wine, alcohol-free options are more limited. That's in large part because alcohol adds a lot of body to a wine and adds complexity to wine. So removing it, you often end up with a drink which is too thin, which is too sweet, and which is out of balance in terms of tannins and other flavour components. If your wine drinking is largely white, cold and bubbly, there are really good alcohol-free Proseccos and alcohol-free sparkling whites. Alcohol-free reds are more challenging, to be frank, although, top tip right now, the Co-op's alcohol-free red is absolutely fantastic. But it is a more challenging category. So if you are, if you kind of think of yourself as a committed wine drinker, thinking about cutting down, actually swapping to a different category might help. So actually choosing a complex, dark, alcohol-free beer, or switching to something like a kombucha, which is going to give you tartness, acidity, sweetness, and some complexity of flavour. That might be a really helpful option as well. The other thing that's saying, I realise that many of you are based in and around Leeds, but if you happen to be in London over the period from the middle of December to the end of January, we're actually opening London's first alcohol-free off-licence, walking distance from Oxford Circus. So if you want to come and try drinks, if you want to talk about the role that alcohol-free drinks can play in supporting people to live a healthy lifestyle, we're going to have over 100 brands represented in the shop as a pop-up shop from the 13th of December. So do come and find us. I want to talk very specifically about a couple of areas which I know are going to be top of mind for people thinking about drinking and thinking about, it's just 1st of December today, about Christmas parties coming up, thinking about socialising and thinking about how you can drink less or not at all if you're worried about your drinking over Christmas. So I want to start by talking about this, which is about building an inclusive social life. If you look at DrinkAware statistics, they produce a report called the DrinkAware Monitor, which surveys the UK population in terms of our drinking habits. Taken together, 1/3 of the UK population either doesn't drink or drinks less than once a month. 1/3 of the UK population either doesn't drink or drinks less than once a month. So if you look around your circle of friends and everyone drinks like you, I can tell you for certain that your social circle is not representative of the UK population as a whole. Even in healthcare environments, the statistics on doctors and nurses, particularly drinking above average compared to the UK population, you may experience that in your social circles if you're drinking with colleagues. But certainly if you look around your social circle and there aren't people who aren't drinking, there are people who are missing. And that may just be people who are having a night off and deciding to stay in, or it may be people who are drinking, avoiding alcohol for religious reasons, or because they're making a different lifestyle choice, or because they are avoiding alcohol for health reasons, or maybe even they're just training for a marathon, or they've got an Ocado delivery in the morning, or they had a big weekend and they need a night off. If there aren't people in your social group who aren't drinking alcohol, It's really important to remember that your drinking habits may not be typical of others. And I think that's especially true kind of coming out of pandemic. One of the things that researchers have observed in terms of our drinking habits is that really our drinking habits polarized over the past couple of years. Those of us who are primarily social drinkers may have found it quite easy to cut down or drink less, particularly in the periods when pubs were closed. Those of us who drink because drinking is a way for unwinding, dealing with stressful situations, for anxiety. You know, we've been living through the most stressful and anxious period in living memory. So you may well find that your drinking has escalated and you're still living with an elevated level of drinking that kind of crept up during lockdowns and dealing with workplace stress and the rest. But what certainly is true is that there are a few people who drink whose drinking hasn't changed because of the pandemic. So if you're meeting up with people this month, maybe people that you haven't seen for a while, don't presume that people are going to be drinking in the way that they drank before. It's always worth a conversation. My second tip is always really to focus on connection, not consumption. You know, there was this period that we've lived through all in recent living memory where pubs were closed, where we didn't have places where we could go and drink socially together. And we found all sorts of ways of maintaining connection with our friends and family that didn't involve sitting in a pub and sinking pints together. And all of those options are still available to us. That's not to say you're not going to go and spend time in pubs with your friends, but all of those other options for making connections are still available to you. So I'd really encourage you, if you're thinking about getting together with groups of friends, to think about connection, ways in which you can spend time together, not necessarily how we can drink together. You know, one of the kind of oddities about British culture, I think, but it does appear in other bits of the world, is that we think that the word socializing and the word drinking mean exactly the same thing. And of course that they don't. You know, there is a lot about alcohol and its effects on us, which enables social connection. You know, it relaxes us, brings a flush of color to our cheeks, makes us chattier, disinhibits us. All of these things that alcohol does to us actually facilitates connection within limits, but there are ways in which we can connect. So I'd really encourage you, if you're bringing people together, think about connection. How can people talk to each other, share experiences, not just what can they drink together? And that really comes to then thinking about venues and menus. So if you're, you know, if you're organising a team drinks or a team Christmas do over the next month, really think about venues which have got good options for people who aren't drinking alcohol. Don't take for granted that those things are available. I had an experience a couple of months ago. I was invited to a work do, and I rang the person who was organising it to say, I'm not going to be drinking on this night. Can you tell me, has the restaurant got stuff that's alcohol free? And they said, oh, I'm sure they will. And of course, you know, alarm bells should have rung for me that wasn't going to be the case. I turned up in a brilliant Italian restaurant, beautiful food, but basically they only had a wine menu. And after a very kind of embarrassing, awkward conversation for the bar staff, you know, I was served increasingly elaborate sparkling water in, you know, beautiful glassware over the course of the evening. You know, they worked really hard to make me feel at home. But don't presume that the places that you're going to have got good alcohol-free options. If you want people to have the same experience and the same quality of experience, whether they're drinking or not, plan ahead, choose venues which have got good options. Many places publish their menus online. And, you know, I don't want to make any assumptions about the quality of venue that you might choose for your team socializing, but Wetherspoons has got a cracking alcohol-free selection. Just putting it out there. The other thing which is really important in the context of socializing is the importance of respecting when people say no for whatever reason. One of the really important conversations we've had in our culture over the past couple of years is about consent, and we haven't yet really applied that thinking about consent to this conversation about alcohol. We present alcohol as an opt-out activity rather than an opt-in activity. So if you are socializing and people do say that they don't want to drink, the correct response isn't, oh, go on, just have one. The correct response is, okay, I'll see what they've got that's alcohol-free. Just a really simple thing to make life easier for people who are choosing to drink less or not at all. I also want to talk a little bit about drinking at home, because that's going to become an issue for us if you're thinking about drinking less or not at all this Christmas. First is to remember, whatever the situation, whatever experience you've ever had, drinking alcohol in any situation is never compulsory. You can always say no, whatever the situation. The second is that you will make your life easier for yourself if you choose alcohol-free options that you actually enjoy drinking. For me, my beer drinking now is almost exclusively alcohol-free. I do drink occasionally, but broadly speaking, I avoid drinking beer which has got alcohol in it in favor of alcohol-free beer. You know, overnight that reduced my alcohol consumption by almost 90%. And I actually really enjoy drinking beer. I like beer. I don't like getting drunk. So alcohol-free beer for me is a really sensible option. But choose stuff that you actually enjoy drinking. If you feel like you're missing out, if you feel like you're depriving yourself, you're going to make it a lot harder to stick to your aims in terms of drinking less. The third is, top tip, mulled wine doesn't have to be alcoholic. You know, actually by the time your mulled wine's been sitting on the stove for half an hour bubbling away, it's actually lost most of its alcohol content anyway. But as I say, the Co-op's got a cracking alcohol-free red wine. You'll find others in supermarkets. You know, once it's in a pan with sugar and some citrus fruit and a sachet of mulling spice. Doesn't really matter whether it had alcohol in it to begin with or start, but you can have a beautiful Christmassy festive drink which is completely alcohol free. That's a really good option. And then I've really kind of start to think about Christmas as a whole. You know, in your festive period, I used to, for example, years ago, when I was a much bigger drinker than I was now, used to have a mulled pies and minced wine, mince pies and mulled wine Christmas party on the first weekend in December. And actually, do you know what? Year by year, it became more and more a wine party than it was a mince pies party. But you know, you can rethink your traditions to make them not as alcohol centric as they are. If your idea, for example, of, you know, we go carol singing, but I'll always do it with a hip flask. You know, take yourself hot chocolate rather than whiskey with you. You know, simple tips. So you can rethink your traditions to make them not as alcohol centric. And this is my final kind of top tip for a happy Christmas: is really prioritize time for yourself. If like me, you end up in a kind of a pressure cooker household where other people are drinking and people start drinking at 9 o'clock when they start preparing the turkey, you can't expect to get through the day unscathed. So pace yourself. You know, if you are drinking, start drinking later in the day, but also prioritize time for yourself. You know, if you need a nap, if you need to take a break at any point in the day, do prioritize time for yourself. It's going to be really important just for maintaining your own health and well-being. If it all gets too much, pull on your boots and a coat, go for a walk around the block. I want to leave you with 3 things that you can do. And then I'm happy to take questions, comments, reflections from you. Just in terms of kind of what's next. The first is, just over the next 7 days, I want to, this is the easiest challenge that anyone's ever presented in a talk like this. I'm not going to ask you to stop drinking or to cut down for the next month or, you know, any of these things. Just over the next 7 days, I want to encourage you to find one event in which you'd normally drink, one situation in which you'd normally drink. So maybe it's a takeaway with your partner at the weekend, or it's going out with your friends, or maybe it's socializing after football, or, you know, some situation in which you'd normally drink. Over the next 7 days, I want you to encourage you to try it alcohol-free, just to see what happens. Don't change anything else about the situation. You know, so if you'd normally have a takeaway and beers, choose takeaway and alcohol-free beers. Just see how it is for you. Particularly if you do it in a social environment, I promise it can be eye-opening, just in terms of noticing how present alcohol is, how environments prime you to drink in different kinds of ways. Just kind of take a look around and see what's going on. But just over the next 7 days, choose one thing and do it alcohol free. The second thing is, if you've been sitting through this thinking, crap, I really am drinking way more than is good for me, I need to do something about it, we've got a free course. You can find it at clubsoda.me/HTCYD. That sounds to how to change your drinking. It's a short free course. It's got A self-assessment questionnaire so you can understand your risks of experiencing withdrawal symptoms. You can also understand how easy you find it to say yes or no to a drink in different social situations, in social drinking, in your emotional drinking and routine drinking. You can understand a little bit about that. It's got some practical tips on choosing alcohol-free drinks. It's got some information about mindfulness and how adopting a mindful attitude towards alcohol can help you change. And it's got some more tips on socializing. So if you're thinking about socializing over this period, do take a look at that course. As I say, it is completely free. It's got a great self-assessment at the beginning, so I encourage you to take a look at that. And then the final thing to do is to follow us at Join Club Soda. We're everywhere on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at Join Club Soda, sharing all sorts of advice and tips about how to change your drinking and how to make it work for you. So there we go. That's it by way of presentation. James has that presentation if you want to circulate it round to people, and obviously the recording as well. But yeah, otherwise, happy to take questions, reflections, thoughts from anyone, either in the chat or if you want to shout out. Okay, somebody in the comment, I've noticed a lot of my social circle is made up of university students. A lot of the time, misconception that alcohol consumption is the only way they can enjoy socializing. Yeah, absolutely. So really interesting, just to speak to that. We've been doing some work with Bournemouth University over the past 3 years, encouraging, normalizing alcohol-free options for students. You know, I mentioned in the statistic that, you know, 1/3 of the UK population either doesn't drink at all or drinks less than once a month. In the student population, that's 50%. 50% of students in the UK either don't drink at all or drink less than once a month. Students are not the people that you think they are. They don't drink how you think they do. So actually, yeah, actually normalizing not drinking is really important. One of the things that we hear from students very often, particularly about student societies, is the way in which students do stuff together. So, you know, you've got an archery club or a gaming night or whatever, but then it feels like the real social connection happens in the pub afterwards. So I'd really encourage you, and I'd encourage you when you're thinking about your own socializing as well. You know, if you've fallen into a football and beers rhythm, you know, which is really quite common, particularly, you know, if you do Sunday afternoon football, is to actually realize that playing the sport together is the social connection. You know, you can talk in that context, you can chat, you can get to know people. You don't have to migrate to a pub for that connection to become different. So it's, yeah, it is really thinking about different ways in which we can connect, which aren't about drinking, I think. Oh, Paul Jackson, you got a hand up. Do you want to chip in?
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Just first of all, thank you for that presentation. For me, that hit so many buttons for me as someone who I wouldn't consider myself a heavy drinker, but I adore craft ale, and I'm sort of quite obsessed really with craft ale and going to different bars. And from a background, you know, where from age 16, the way I socialise, particularly with male friends, is down the pub, and getting that a little bit older and suffering more and more from the day after, just trying to think, well, what is the alternative?
Yeah.
So just 2 or 3 points. First of all, the point you just made about students. I recently, I've just finished a graduate management course. So I was socialising with people who were 20 years my junior. I couldn't believe their different attitude to alcohol compared to my generation. It was unbelievable. It's still like a drink, but it wasn't necessarily the focus of the evening. So they go to a bar and play board games. I'm not suggesting that was particularly at my street, but it was just fascinating. And then secondly, you talked about, I think it sounds like you're a big fan of the craft ale as well. Is there kind of a site where there's kind of recommendations? I was in a pub last night in the Dales, and they only had Heineken Zero. It wasn't bad, to be fair.
Yeah.
I tend to find when I go to even nice crafty bars that, yeah, you'll see Nanny State, but it'd be really good if, you know, is there a kind of place where I can find decent recommendations?
Yeah, so actually we've got tons of beer reviews on our website at joinclubsoda.com. A couple of other things worth checking out. If you're on Instagram, there's AF Beer Club. Robin, who runs that, is a big craft ale fan. We work in partnership with a company called Wise Bartender, who are an alcohol-free drinks distributor. They've got a cracking range of alcohol-free beers. The other thing is I would encourage you to check out bigger supermarkets as well, and bottle shops. Increasingly, there are some, but to be frank, there are some people in the beer world who don't see the point of alcohol-free beer. And so there are some bottle shop owners who won't stock it. You know, let's just be honest about that. But you know, you will find increasingly specialist beer shops will have a good range. You know, I hear you about Heineken Zero. If you like Heineken Zero is a great drink. If you want something as a more complex beer, it's not going to hit the mark. But yeah, so yeah, often you'll find good stuff online.
Yeah, because I guess presumably from a commercial point of view, there's probably more profit to be made on a single bottle of alcohol-free beer than an alcohol version. I guess the problem is that people don't necessarily buy 10 of them.
Yeah, and so the issue for pubs is really about, and this is particularly true on draft, why you won't see alcohol-free beers on draft, because alcohol's a preservative. Alcohol-free substances don't have the same shelf life, so you've got storage and volume issues from a pub's perspective. That's the simple answer to that. But bottle shops are a good option.
Thank you.
No worries. And thanks for the question. Any other questions, reflections?
I've got a quick question for you, Drew. Then you just mentioned there about just in kind of response to Paul's question. Is there like could you possibly give us like a top three? You know, what your top three non-alcoholic drinks would be, or alcohol-free drinks would be?
So my personal top three. Okay, so I am a big fan. My family's all from Suffolk originally, so I'm a big fan of Adnams. There's a great regional brewery in the east of England. They produce Ghost Ship, which is one of their standard ales, but they've got a Ghost Ship 0.5, which is great. I also, beyond Nanny State, actually Brewdog have got an increasingly good range of alcohol-free options. So I really like Hazy AF, which is a cloudy beer. That's excellent. And final alcohol-free beer. Yeah, actually, I'm going to give a shout out to Heineken Zero. It basically saved my bacon at a family wedding in Ireland when anyone was drinking Guinness. So yeah, you know, if you're looking for an unchallenging lager that you can knock back bottle after bottle, Heineken Zero is the way to go.
Yeah.
Oh, Carl, you put a hand up. You got a question?
Yeah. So I was the person that mentioned the social circle that's composed of mostly university students, and well, I completely agree with the encouraging normalizing not like drinking heavily in students. Like I've cut down quite for the past few months, and I've realised that I've had a lot more enjoyable times going out with my friends, even remaining like pretty much sober. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's good. You know, and thanks for sharing that, Carl. It is good to just experiment. You know, and notice how you react in different social situations if you don't have a drink in your hand. You know, if you're not drinking alcohol, can you connect in the same way as you know others? I've lost track of hands going up. Somebody just put up a hand.
Yeah, so we had Richard. I think Richard Berridge's hand was up first.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, Drew. You just kind of stirred a thought in my mind when you talked about that wedding in Ireland and the Guinness. A little while ago, there was a story about Guinness releasing an alcohol-free, but then it was withdrawn from the market. I think there was a problem with it. Are you aware if there is an alcohol-free Guinness or a similar stout at least? It's a drink I like.
Yeah, alcohol-free Guinness is back on the market. You can find it in Tesco's and Asda and other big supermarkets. Actually, Guinness interestingly got themselves into a bit of hot water because they, you know, going back to what I said about, you know, those of us who drink alcohol are the target market of alcohol-free drinks. They've actually produced a mixed pack of alcoholic and non-alcoholic Guinness cans, which you can buy in supermarkets, and they've actually got into hot water with some people who only who avoid alcohol completely about the labelling of it and whether it's entirely clear that it includes alcohol or not alcohol. But yeah, alcohol-free Guinness is absolutely back.
Excellent, thank you very much.
No worries. And there was a final hand went up, I think.
There's two more. So there's Adam Morell and then Hayley Duffy next. So okay. Adam first.
Yeah, cheers, Drew. That was really good. Certainly makes me consider how I go about my drinking on a weekend. It's something I do wrestle with a little bit, how to cut back. I was wondering, so for me, going out for a pint with the lads, it's also a bit of a social lubricant, isn't it? It sort of loosens you up. The conversation flows a bit better, I always feel, when you're 2 pints deep. Is there any sort of, I mean, there might not be, and is there any sort of evidence to suggest that having a non-alcoholic drink in that sort of social setting, is there sort of like a placebo effect that you forget that you're drinking a non-alcoholic drink, and as such, you're just as relaxed and confident?
Yeah, really interestingly, actually, UCL did some work on this a few years ago, looking at how people react to alcohol-free drinks. And what they found is, for those people who didn't know that they were drinking something alcohol-free, acted as if they were drunk. So yeah, but there is something actually, particularly if you are out with mates. If everyone else is standing with a glass in their hand and if you're not holding something, you feel like an odd one out. So actually, whether you're holding a bottle of beer or you're holding, if you find Heineken they're going to be rolling out Heineken Zero on draft across 20,000 venues over the next 2 years. So, you will be able to stand in a pub with a pint of alcohol-free lager in your hand. But yeah, actually having something in your hand really helps. My other tip in that situation is I'm somebody who lives with anxiety. And one of the things that I found really helpful in managing anxiety in social situations is just to go armed with a really good list of questions, because that puts the spot. Most people like talking about themselves. I don't particularly, but other people do. But if you go with good questions, you put the spotlight on them and off you, and I find that really helps me as well. So if I've got an alcohol-free beer, somebody else is talking, I'm all good. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that was really good response. Certainly, not having a drink in your hand, it's one of those things that make you finish your drink. You're like, right, I'll go to the bar, so I've got another pint in me. I understand that.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah. Oh, there was a question can I just pick it up? A question in the chat about, do we change as we age? Broadly speaking, what the statistics suggest is that, particularly when we get into very much into our 70s, drinking kind of polarizes, that many people actually just stop drinking completely. Other people find that their drinking creeps up over time, particularly if you're drinking. There's something I observe in our community, and I work a lot with people in their 60s and 70s who are trying to cut down or stop drinking, is that people find that it's the routine drinking, it's the drinking that you don't normally think about, that's what creeps up. So if you're in a routine of, I always buy wine on the way home from work, I always have gin and tonic before Sunday lunch, we always have beers for the summer barbecue, that type of always drinking, the drinking that you never think about, is the stuff that creeps up over time. And that's the stuff which will increase as you age. And obviously, the more you drink, the more your tolerance increases. So you need to drink more to get the same effect. So it's just something to keep an eye on. Is your drinking changing and increasing as you age, particularly routine drinking? But really important to know, I work with people in their 70s who are significantly changing their relationship with alcohol. So it is never too late to rethink, to fine tune and to cut back.
Thanks, Drew. There was Hayley Duffy did have a hand up, but she's put it down, so I don't know if you've answered her question. I don't know if she's dropped out of the chat.
No, I was just wary of time, because it was just more of a comment, really. But it was that whole thing you were saying about the relationship of having it as the consent and an opt-in rather than the opt-out. I remember going back. I mean, this is probably about 10 years ago now. but it really was kind of the behavior behind it. Like if you went out and actively weren't drinking, I remember like on one specific occasion, this set of friends, I always said you could never have a quiet night with them. Like I tried to have them around for dinner and got alcohol-free wine. I mean, it tasted awful, so that didn't. Again, it was before it was, they'd kind of honed in on some good stuff. But I remember one specific night going out and I was saying, I'll come out for a few drinks, but I'm actually not physically drinking, but I'll come out and socialise. And they couldn't get their head around it. And I remember going to the bar to go and speak to someone. I'd left my drink on the table and I came back and someone had actually, I say spiked it, but had bought a shot and just put it in my drink without. And so I went to go take a drink. I was like, right, there's vodka in this. And it was just that kind of whole thing. And at the time, everyone thought it was like a hilarious thing.
Yeah.
And you just kind of laugh it off, but it's not as it should be. You should be able to have that kind of consent.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really important. I mean, there is, you know, particularly among student populations and among people in their 20s, there's a lot of concern about spiking right now. Just to say, it's a criminal offence. You know, if do not give people alcohol without their explicit consent. It seems such like an obvious thing to say, but yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Hayley. There are definitely the thing that I notice. You know, I've got my circles of friends now generally pretty well trained. They'd be quite surprised if I asked for alcohol in a pub. In fact, my brother was completely shocked the last time I asked for a pint of Guinness in a pub. But you know, I've got people well trained. But actually, you know, if you move in social circles which are all about drinking as your main way of connecting with each other, you may find that tricky as you cut down and as you stop drinking. And actually, it might be a good opportunity just to think about what are the ways in which I can connect and make life work for me. And yeah, to start to think that through, I think could be really helpful. Thanks, Hayley. Good observation. Oh, question in the chat, if I can pick that up. Do men recognise the impact of excess alcohol drink on their mental health and the impact on their family friends? Stephen, the simple answer to your question is generally no. So if you are interested more on this, actually, the Scottish Health Alcohol Action Partnership, SHAAP, actually did a big research study. I think that's what they stand for, SHAP. They did a big research study this year on men and alcohol. There is tons of really interesting stuff in there about male drinking culture and connection. And one of the things that we observe, one of the challenges is particularly about men's health-seeking behaviours, health information-seeking behaviours. Men generally will, again, broad gender stereotypes, but men are much more likely to seek help at the point where they're experiencing real physical consequences of a mental or physical health issue, rather than a nagging concern. So men generally will tend to leave things later. So yeah, men generally are slower in coming forward than women might be when it relates to alcohol. That's terrible generalisation, but that's kind of a broad observation. But yeah, SHAP's work, SHAAP, their work on men and alcohol is really worth checking out. It's excellent.
Brilliant. Thank you, Drew, for your time today. Some really good questions there. I've been abstinent from alcohol for nearly 13 years now. It'll be 13 years in January. So just that was due to I needed an operation. They told me to stop drinking in preparation for that, and I've just never started again. So I think it's been tricky because like 11 years ago, the amount of alcohol-free stuff that was available, it just wasn't very good, but now it's definitely getting better. You mentioned Ghost Ship, I've had some of that. There's a couple of others as well. Doom Bar Zero as well is pretty good. There's a few decent ones out there now. And like you said there, it's about kind of, once people kind of acknowledge that you're not drinking, it just becomes so much easier. Like my friends, like when I first stopped drinking, we were going out and we'd be going to bars and they'd be doing shots and be like, just get Jimmy a shot of water. So I'd have a shot of water with them just to be part of their festivities or whatever. But obviously as I've kind of got older, it's kind of, just kind of natural now. Like, oh, do you want a non-alcoholic drink, mate, or do you want a Diet Coke, or whatever? So yeah, it's definitely changing. There's a lot of better stuff out there on the market. So I'll definitely check out some of those websites. So yeah, so thank you for your time, Drew. Really appreciate that. Some really good stuff, and I've got the slides, and so we'll share them. And we're going to put together like a resource pack as well to send out to people that are attending. So I'll put your slides in that, and maybe I'll have a look at some of the links that you mentioned as well and put them in as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'll ping you a link to the Shap's work on men and alcohol, because it is really useful. I'll send that to you now.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, thank you.
Right, no worries.
Brilliant.
Thanks
so much.
A lot.
All right, cheers. Take care. Thank you.
Right, James, are we going to break for lunch now and then come back for 1 o'clock, where we've got Bill Cross, urology, prostate surgeon, and then following that we've got Jane Brock